Saints' Day. And it is a day when we focus not only on the work that we have to do to become saints, but we think about those people in our pasts who were saints to us. We think about the saints of the church, and we think about the saints of our lives. Jesus, you see, really went about his work trying to teach people to be saints. He wanted to teach them to live their lives in such a way that they were in sync with what God wanted them to do. In today's lesson we hear the Beatitudes. Many of us, older folks in the room, had to memorize the Beatitudes when we were in Sunday school. How many of you had to memorize the Beatitudes? Okay, next question. How many of them you can still recite them by heart?
Been a long time.
Been a long time. But they're lessons to live by. Jesus was teaching the disciples what they needed to do to be happy, to be fulfilled, to live lives that were grounded in God and therefore blessed. We are in the section of Matthew's Gospels known as the teaching section. Jesus is teaching and teaching on his way to Jerusalem so that when he is gone, the disciples will have taken into themselves the lessons by which to live in the future. Something else Jesus said to them was this: stop collecting treasures for your own benefit on earth, where moth and rust eat them and where thieves break in and steal them. Instead, he said, collect treasures for yourselves in heaven, where moth and rust don't eat them and where thieves don't break in and steal them. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Today, as we gather on the Feast of All Saints' Day, we think about the real saints. You know, the saints of the church, like Francis or Teresa or Monica or Peter or Paul. Maybe when you went through confirmation class, you had to not only memorize the Beatitudes, but you had to choose a saint for yourself. Someone whose life would guide you for the rest of your lives. Someone who you would think about in times of trouble. Someone whose wisdom remained with you. We know about the church saints, and they are real saints to us, but we also have the really, really real saints. The saints of our hearts. The saints of our lives. Perhaps one of those saints is a high school friend who died far, far too young, but who taught you something about living life well beyond his or her years. Or maybe it was your grandmother or your grandfather who taught you that there would be lots of people in your life who simply took your breath away, but that you would marry the one who gave it back. Maybe it was your father who said, if it's about truth, if it's about justice, you must remain in the battle. I hope that for each of you, there is a long list of saints that are coming into your mind as we sit here. People whom we love but no longer see. People who we feel with us and miss desperately. Before we gather around the table for communion this morning, I will invite you to come forward and light a candle and place it on the altar in remembrance of those saints that you carry on your heart, bringing the light of their life, which still burns brightly, present with us today. The thing about saints is they have really, really high standards. And they instill those standards in us. The thing about saints is that they helped us become the people that we have become. They helped shape us into being who we are today. Something that they taught us or showed us became part of the fabric that makes us us. Somewhere along the way, they taught us about what to treasure, and in so doing showed us where our heart would be. Many years ago, when I was preparing to go to seminary, one of the things that I had to face was that I was going to be moving to a much, much smaller house. In fact, a house that was a third the size of the house I was then living in. And that I would be supporting myself on a much, 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 much smaller budget. In fact, I didn't really have a budget in seminary. To prepare for this, my mother and my father and my grandmother and I spent lots of time going through things at my house, trying to figure out what I needed and what I did not need, what maybe could go on to someone else, what I should put in storage. Now, for those of you that don't know, I'm a military brat. My father was military for 43 years and we moved a lot. And when you move a lot, you get really good at not having hangers-on, so to speak. You get really good at weeding stuff out every 6 months, and I actually pride myself on being able to tear down a house and set up a house in 1 week, either side of the move. So there wasn't a lot to go through, but we went through everything, and I finally decided that I really didn't need to leave anything in storage. Rationalizing with myself that if I didn't need it in the 3 years I was in seminary, I probably really wasn't going to need it. And maybe somebody else needed it more. One day, the moving van pulled up to the front of my house in a very short period of time, loaded up what was left, my meager household, into the van and headed east. I remember standing in the driveway a little bit befuddled at how really little there was on the truck that was vital to me. That experience forced me to ask the question, what do I really treasure and why? What do I really treasure? You know, our treasure is not our stuff. Let me say that again. Our treasure is not our stuff. I tell myself that every morning when I go in the closet and look at all of my beautiful shoes. You're not my treasure, I say to them. Our treasure is not the things that we collect. It's not the stuff on our shelves. Did you know that there is approximately, now I say approximately because someone will Google this within 20 minutes of this service if they're not doing it right now. There's approximately 2.3 billion with a B, square feet of rentable self-storage space in the United States. 2.3 billion square feet of rentable storage space in the United States. We have so much stuff in the United States that an entire industry has grown up around giving us a place to put our stuff that we have to have, but we don't have any place for. We have so much stuff that we filled our basements, we filled our extra bedrooms, we filled our attics, we filled our garages. How many of you can park both of your cars in your garage? Oh, that's better than most people. Yeah, that's good. I'm proud of y'all. Most people cannot park both cars. Sometimes one, but you kind of have to get out of the car like this, you know? You know how that goes?
Is it really bad they can't park either?
We'll talk later. We'll talk later. We have a lot of stuff, and we're very fond of our stuff. But that's not our treasure. We here at Holy Trinity are beginning a stewardship series called the Treasure Series. It's a series that looks at our stuff and our treasure and why we have it and why we think it's our treasure. I have to admit that when I moved into my new home, I used almost everything I had packed away. The couches, the refrigerator, the beds were all put to good use. So there is stuff that we truly need. But I bet that you are like me and that you have two lists in your life. One's a needs list and one's a wants list. Tell me which one is longer. Which is longer, your needs list or your wants list? If you're like me, your wants list is, like this. And your needs list is about like this. And your needs list probably hasn't changed very much most of your life. Since you were very, very young, your needs list has probably been pretty much the same. While I was in seminary, in fact, my second year of seminary, my grandmother died. She is one of the saints that I will light a candle for and remember today. When she died, she left many of the things from my ancestral home to my mother and my siblings and me. One of the stipulations of the estate was that the items would be packed up and sent to wherever the recipient lived. So one beautiful October day, some 6 months after she died, and we had buried her, a moving van pulled up in front of my very small house in the woods in Sewanee, Tennessee, and delivered 2 crates of my grandparents' belongings. I don't know why, but the crates intimidated me. So it took me several days to actually open the crates. I'd go off to classes in the morning and I'd come back. They were sitting on the back deck of my home there, and so I'd go in the front door because that way I didn't have to encounter the crates. Or I'd wander out on the back deck and I'd walk around the crates and I'd kind of look at them and I'd pet the plywood of the crates, and then I'd go back inside and I'd sit down and think about them. Finally, one day I decided to pry the first of the crates open. And as the crate opens with the creak of the nails pulling out of the woods, the smell of my grandparents' home wafted around me, completely encompassing me. I sat on the floor and wept. Overcome, I thought at the loss of that which had taught me to be me. Not the things, not the stuff, but the relationships, the people, the conversations, the lives, the experiences. All of them surrounded me sitting there on the deck. And I didn't care one whit about the stuff. As clergy, we have the opportunity and the privilege to be with people in their last days. Rarely, I will tell you, in those last moments, do people talk about the things they have acquired on earth. The kind of treasure that moth and rust can destroy. The kind that thieves can break in and steal. People in their last moments talk about their family, their friends, moments when they encountered God, children they have taught, trips they have taken, lives they have changed. They talk about vacations and laughter, and they share stories that are amusing and meaningful and touching and tearful. They talk. Never have I experienced anyone talk about salaries or bank accounts or the car they drove, but always have they talked about the promises they shared with God and with one another. When people talk about their last days, it is the places within their hearts, the places where their hearts and their treasures are in sync that we hear about. And they share those lessons, I believe, because they want us, just like Jesus wanted us, to know how to bring the two, our treasure and our heart, into alignment. The lessons that our saints most want us to understand are about how we are investing our lives, our hearts. We at Holy Trinity over the next several weeks are going to be talking about how we invest our lives. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and try and pretend that it's not also about money. You know, Jesus actually talked a lot about money. In fact, Jesus talks more about money than about heaven and hell combined. Jesus talks more about money than about heaven and hell combined. It was very important to Jesus. Jesus talked more about money than anything except the kingdom of God. 11 of Jesus' 39 parables are about money, and one of every 7 verses in the Gospel of Luke, the birth narrative gospel, talks about money. 1 in 7. In the Sermon on the Mount, we see that Jesus is looking at the heart. He cares about the hearts of God's people. Jesus talks about money and treasure because he knows it affects our hearts. He knows money stresses our relationships. He knows that money causes divisions in and amongst people. Money and its pursuits can become burdensome and all-consuming. Anyone who has lost a job, and I rather imagine there are many of us in this room, or finds money hard to find, will tell you that it's not just a financial issue, but an emotional and spiritual one. Jesus cares about our hearts. We usually think and say that where our heart is, our treasure will follow. Jesus says it in the opposite. Where our treasure is, there our heart is also. This is not just a change in semantics. Jesus knows that the places where we spend our money will become our treasure, whether we want it to or not. All of us who are homeowners know this firsthand. The minute you buy a house, there goes your money. Financial commitments require time and energy, and they pull our heart in that direction, and perhaps not in the direction that we or God ever intended. When we put our treasure into anything, our heart will follow. What if we did it the other way around? Billy Graham was asked late in his life, if you could do anything, if you could go back and do anything differently, what would it be? He said, I'd spend more time at home with my family. I'd study more and preach less. Can you imagine one of the greatest preachers of our time saying, I preach less? I wouldn't have taken so many speaking engagements. He said, whenever I counsel someone who feels called to be an evangelist, and that's every single one of us, whenever I counsel someone who feels called to be an evangelist, I always urge them to guard their time and not feel like they have to do absolutely everything. So I want to close with a couple questions for all of us to ponder. What do you want to be invested in? And I don't mean your Morgan Stanley account. If you didn't have any debts or any commitments, and if you could choose where to store up treasure, where would it be? What do you want to be investing in? What are you investing in? Have you considered where you are storing up your treasure? Have you really sat down and taken a moment to assess realistically where your current treasure is? Do you feel being pulled in a way that may not be the way that God wants you to go? Jesus tells us that we have an opportunity to lay up treasure in heaven. When we are investing our lives in the things of God, we find that our hearts no longer feel disconnected from God, but rather are in unity with God. What steps, what little tiny beginning steps can you take to lay up treasure